I want to tell you that the dream for me has always been to provide you with some quality resource partners. And I am so happy to let you know that we have officially onboarded about a handful of great folks who can help you in the next step to your healing journey, whatever that looks like. I'm going to tell you about the few that we have on board right now in just a second, but then encourage you to go to learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com and hit that resources tab to connect with any one of them. We'll do that, and then we'll get to today's podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. So almost every week of my life for the last 2 years, somebody will ask me about the retreat that changed my life. And I'm so proud to present Spirit Quest as one of our official resource partners. Founded in 2007, it's the holistic wellness center that changed my life, helped me overcome anxiety, helped me work through conflict, gave me all these tools to manage stress, and they would love to do the same thing for you. To connect to Spirit Quest, click the link on our resources tab at learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com, and when you get on the phone with them, make sure you mention that you heard it on Learn From People Who Lived It. You've probably heard me say this before, but most of the things that kill us are preventable, and that's exactly why I put my heart in his hands, in his care. I'm talking about Dr. Robert Todd Hurst and HealthSpan MD. He's my cardiologist because I appreciate his holistic approach to heart health. There's nothing out there like HealthSpan MD. His AFib reversal program, his CAD reversal program. Get the link on the resources page at learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com. At Mental Joe, they sell more than shirts. They sell apparel with a purpose. In fact, my favorite hoodie in my closet is a Mental Joe hoodie. They help out GI Joes to the average Joes one t-shirt at a time. With every purchase, you help them support organizations that can provide services to help others get out of their heads and into their bodies through plant medicines, equine therapy, yoga, and other non-traditional mental health treatments. Link to them. Pick out your favorite t-shirt or hoodie right now at learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com/resources. One of our proud resource partners is Eric's House. Here's the deal. Nothing quite prepares us for the heartache of a profound loss. And grief isn't a problem to be fixed, but rather a normal reaction to loss. So when somebody you love dies, it might feel like everything you once knew as true has changed. When we experience that loss, especially the ones that are really unexpected, like suicide or addiction, grief is complicated. That's where the community at Eric's House comes in. Link to them on the resources page at learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com.
Find Learn From People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from people who lived it.
Welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It.
Sure, my name is Bob Fabey, and I am 52 years old.
Bob, what story are you here to share?
I'm here to share the story about moving from kind of like disgust to dignity.
We've not used that word in a long time, maybe ever, Dr. Frank.
That is deep.
All right. Who do you hope hears this?
Anybody who has a sense of a loss of identity, and anybody who's feeling objectified or has a sense of self-loathing about themselves.
Which could be a few people. Well, welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It. I am Mathew Blades. In the middle is Bob Fabey, who we're going to get to talk to today. On the right is Dr. Frank Bavacqua, who is very pregnant, not himself, but his wife.
It feels like we're both pregnant.
Does it?
Yeah.
And are you sharing the news? Is the news for public consumption yet? I mean, keep in mind that this podcast won't come out for about a month.
Yeah. I guess we're public. We're having a baby.
And
it's a girl.
I know. That's so awesome. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Well, like when you heard that it was a girl, did you freak out?
Yes and no. Yes, because what the heck do I know about raising a girl? What do I know about raising a boy? But what do I know about raising a girl? But the hair braiding lessons are going to start soon. So
okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're super excited for you, man. Congratulations. Maybe actually we could lean on Bob a little bit because Bob's got a 23-year-old daughter that he's
a couple years ahead.
Ushered to marriage, and so he has successfully raised and released. So maybe he's got some options and some knowledge for us.
We'll see about that. Maybe you should be interviewing her instead, and she can tell you whether or not.
That's great. Well, listen, I'm really excited to get in this conversation today. Let me tell you why. Bob and I don't know each other, but we have this mutual, I guess, colleague. And this is kind of a funny story, Frank, so I'm going to share it with everybody up front. About a year ago, we needed brakes on my wife's car. Right? I know you're thinking like you never thought this was going to be the story. We needed brakes for my wife's car. And I got on Yelp and I was like, brakes. And all of a sudden this guy, Nate the Brakes or something like that shows up. And I call this guy and he's outstanding. I can tell from the moment I talked to him that he's a good dude. And his business is he basically meets you where you need him to meet you. And he works on your car there. Has this little trailer with all his stuff. And so he's got everything, that a shop would have. And he takes care of your stuff. So long story short, we have a little visit and I kind of tell him what I do. And long story short, a few months later, he pops into my email and he's like, you know what? I think you need to talk to this guy, Bob Fabey. And I said, really? Why don't you connect us? And so we got connected, and that's why he's here today, because of Nate and his brake service. So that's pretty accurate. Has he worked on your cars too, Bob?
Yep, a bunch. We use them for our cars and our family's cars and my kids' cars and everybody that we can. We're like, hey, you got to talk to Nate because he's a great guy.
Yeah.
It's great because I feel like mechanics are high trust people. It's like a lawyer. You never know what you're going to get. And so if you find somebody that you can trust, it's like gold. So Nate's like gold to us.
Well, listen, we'll link to Nate's business in the show notes, everybody, because I know everybody wants to click him and give him business now. You talk an awful lot as a consultant now about something called the dignity gap. And you actually used it up front. You said, I want to move you from disgust to dignity. And I'm going to guess, like most people, you had to go through that transformation first. So can you help us understand what your life was like when you were living in disgust, and then talk us through that transformation to dignity and courage and leadership and some of the other things that I know you're so passionate about now. So where did this all start for you, Bob?
Well, I think it starts in a couple different places, and it's more of like a cocktail than like a one-off thing. My parents were raised on the East Coast. My dad came from an abusive home and then went to Vietnam and was special ops. So that's a great, what would you say, environment for, not healthy stuff to happen. He and my mom, they got married 2 weeks after he got back from Vietnam, and immediately got pregnant with my brother. He's 2.5 years older than I am. And so they really didn't have a clue about, what does it mean to be married? What does it mean to raise kids? And then obviously, how do you work through trauma that you've been through, whether it's their own trauma or, trauma from war. And so I like to just say, like, we didn't know that we were dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. We didn't have a term for that until about, I don't know, maybe, what has it been, 10 years? Where people really started kind of going like, hey, this is what this is. So we didn't know when the landmine was going to go off in the house and the shouting would start and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of uncertainty around my own behavior and like, what was I going to do to make sure that everything didn't kind of go off the way it did? But then I was also the benefit of having some really hideous teeth, which I'm grateful for dentists now. But growing up, I had a massive overbite, and the kids are kids and would remind me of the fact that I didn't fit in and that I was weird looking.
So good at that, aren't
they? Et cetera. Oh man, they're fantastic. They can point out a difference in a heartbeat. Yeah. And so I knew that I was loved. I knew my parents loved me. It didn't always translate. And then I would go to school and I would be reminded that I didn't really fit in, or that I was not wanted, or however you want to translate that. So instead of that producing something outward where, I would say like, okay, I'm going to prove everybody wrong, and I would try to excel, I brought all that inward. So I wound up with a ton of self-loathing and disgust. And I think disgust works two different ways. When I use that term, from disgust to dignity, there's an interior disgust, like I hate myself, hate who I am, all that kind of stuff. But then there's also like, I have a, disdain or disgust for people around me. And so, oftentimes when you don't like who you are, the people around you can't be all that valuable if they like you because you think so little of yourself. Or we become hyper judgmental and we just think like, oh, those people are just, we objectify everybody. So really that's where I was. That carried through. I mean, so what I did in order to deal with the disgust was, I drank like crazy. I mean, I just kind of ran my own life the way I thought I could run it, trying to get, any sense of the fact that those things weren't true, and tried to avoid the things that would embed that in my heart and in my mind. I think the fact that I had, and I still have, migraine. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I've had it my whole life. And so migraine became this kind of subtext for everything where it's like, something's wrong with me. I can't function the way I need to function. I can't think the way I want to think. I can't, all of those things. So you just wind up with this pretty amazing cocktail of self-loathing and didn't like myself very much.
I'm bringing in the psychologist right away because, I don't know, Dr. Frank, that I have a big grip on self-loathing, and maybe the two of you can kind of bat this around a little bit, but what does that mean for you, Frank, and how's that going to impact somebody?
I mean, I think everyone's going to have a slightly different definition. And so obviously I'd love to hear Bob's, but I mean, essentially, like, you look at yourself as not worth much or worth anything at all, right? And maybe at an extreme, you even start to kind of actively reject certain parts of you. Hate could be a word that gets thrown, right? You hate certain parts of you. But I think using that label is going to be somewhere in that family. But I think it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. So, let's go to kind of our expert of the day, right? What is your definition of what that means for you?
I think hate is a pretty good word. I mean, obviously I hated my teeth. I hated the fact that I had migraine. And then, I hated the kids who made me feel small. There were a lot of things that, so when I think about self-loathing, part of that for me was powerlessness, feeling powerless, and able to, despite the fact that I wasn't, feeling that pretty acutely. I remember there was a time where I almost took my life because of it. And the thing that stopped me was—
How old were you, Bob?
I was 7th grade.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't do it because actually it was more, I thought about my mom having to find me. About my mom having to find me. And I didn't want that for her. So I didn't do it. And so really it's like, I would say there's a hatred there. I think that's a fair word. I always think of it as just like self-loathing, where it's like, man, I wish I were somebody different, or I wish these things about my life were different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I hope that people key in, and we've done, hundreds of episodes now where some version of this has come out, but like that, if that's going to be your operating system, you can imagine all of the toxic ways that's going to show up for things. And one of my favorite lines to deliver when I talk to people now is I talk about, like, when I was in the mud for myself, I was the worst husband, the worst father, the worst friend, the worst coworker, and the worst part about it all was the way that I treated myself. And I didn't care about that then, but I care a lot about it now. And I don't know if you identify with that, but when your operating system isn't going the right way, it's so hard to make sense of anything in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's always like a but. So if somebody says, "Oh, you're good at this," it's like, yeah, but and so you can always find a way that that those things aren't true. And you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I think most people would have found like, oh, he's a nice guy, and I really did respect people. I tried to treat them carefully, because I knew what it was like to not be treated carefully. But I had a hard time believing that there was anything more to me to offer than, beyond, so people would say, "Oh, you're good at this." And I'd say, "Yeah, but I'm not as good as somebody else." Or there would be things like that I would just keep, I don't know if it's a, what do you call it? Self-fulfilling, thing, but it would have been aligned with that pretty significantly.
Doesn't it just drive you crazy, Dr. Frank, that there's not some magic wand that you can just whip on people and be like, stop self-loathing, you're done, you're cured? Like, it would be so amazing if there was just something we could say to them And I want you to talk about this a little bit, Dr. Frank, because what I've come to learn is that it doesn't matter how bad everybody around me wants it. Until I want it for myself, until I'm ready to do it for myself, zero is going to change. Talk about that.
Yeah, and like the more I think other people try to change it for you, it's almost like the stronger you stick to your own negative conviction, right? You talked about the magic wand or the pill. Wasn't there a Saturday Night Live skit years ago? It was like a therapist, somebody talking about, being anxious, and the therapist would just be like, stop it. Right. Oh, you're worrying about stuff. Stop it. Right?
Stop it.
And it's driving me nuts. I can't remember who the actor was. But like, it was
like a Chris Kattan situation, doesn't it? Like,
it was funny because in theory, it should be that simple, right? You're doing this thing that is not serving you, that doesn't make you feel great. So stop it. But it's not that easy. Obviously, it's not that easy. I wish it was.
Yeah. But isn't it so ironic? And both Bob and I, maybe even you to a degree, Frank, could talk about this. Like, actually, at the end of the day, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
At the end of the day, you sort of have to stop it.
Yeah.
And change your behavior.
That's sort of what it looks like, right? Yeah. At the outcome of it, you have stopped doing that thing and you're now doing something else. The thing that comes to mind, and I've used this analogy a lot, but I don't know if I've ever actually used it on one of our shows.
What you been waiting for, man? We've been doing this 2 years.
If I use all my good stuff up front, you won't keep having me back. So I have to keep some stuff in the back pocket to make sure I'm invited back. I think back to when I was in driver's ed, and the phrase that sticks with me still is you steer where you stare. So if you're driving along and something on the side of the road catches your eye and you start staring at it as you drive by, you are going to kind of subconsciously start drifting toward that curb. If you're staring at oncoming traffic, then you're going to kind of drift that way. So obviously the best place to stare is straight ahead in between the lines that you're supposed to stay in. Our lives are the same way, right? If we are constantly thinking about the negative aspects of ourselves, we are going to keep unconsciously steering toward those negative things. And if there's a positive thing, being said to us and a possible negative thought in our head, we are going to continue to steer toward that negative thing. You use the term operating system, right? That's just what our operating system is kind of set to default, right? So what stopping that looks like is learning how to stare at a different part of you.
Love that explanation. So, Bob, when does the moment of clarity come for you? So when do you finally stop it? Like, when does that happen for you? What leads up to that? All of it.
I think there's probably a few things. And I would like to say there was this lightning bolt moment where everything changed. And there was with regards to my faith and how I practice my faith. With regards to kind of some of the self-loathing, and I talk about this in other places, but I had a teacher Mr. Jones, this is why I remember Mr. Jones, okay, science teacher, and I don't even like science, but I remember Mr. Jones, and I was acting out in this class, and I deserved, I had to get kicked out in the hallway, which, was frequent, and I'm out in the hallway, and he's poking me in the chest, he's like, you got to stop this, and he went to poke me, and I batted his hand and I slugged him in the shoulder. And then I was like, I probably shouldn't have done that. He gets really close to me and he's like, don't you ever do that again. And I'm like, oh, geez. So he calls me into his room. I think it was after school or during lunch. And he has me write on a piece of paper. He says, I want you to draw a line down the middle of the paper. And he says, on the right side of this line, I want you to list everything you like about yourself. And this is like, so that's 7th or 8th grade. And I came up with maybe a couple things, and then he said, okay, on the other side, I want you to list all the things you don't like. And I could fill the page pretty quickly. And then he gets out a piece of paper and he shows me his, and his was inverted. It was the opposite. And he said, hey, this is what I don't like about you. And this is what I like about you. And it took, I guess I should say, that planted a seed. Because what he was doing was actually, he was validating my dignity. And he was trying to help me to see there's a different way, like you said, operating system, there's a different way to view things. And he's saying, this is what I see. So when I see your behavior, I understand I don't like your behavior, but this is who I see you as. That really helped me as a seed planted to be able to say, like, there's identity and there's behavior. And for me, those two things are very different. And so who I see myself to be is more important than my behavior. And I know they're linked. I understand that. But if we just judge people by our behaviors, we miss who they think they are. So yes, I was a mess if you looked at my behaviors. I'd still hold the door open for people. I'd still act with kindness. I'd still do all those things. And I would get just super drunk and I would do all this other stuff. And so it's kind of this contradiction, but it's like, who am I and what does that mean? And it wasn't until, I had run the road pretty far by the time I was a sophomore year in college. And it was, I decided that I would give my faith a try. Meaning like I would, try to be a Christian, and I was like sucked, like the worst Christian ever. I was like terrible because I was like, I know this is important. I should be doing this thing, and I can't seem to do it. And so it wasn't until I got, I actually wound up going to this conference my sophomore year of college, and I had a key learning about what it means to be a Christian, and that's where my identity changed. And that helped me immensely to be able to say, like, okay, well, if this is true, then what do I do from here? And so in one sense, I totally agree with you, Doctor, where you're saying, like, it really is this simple. It's like, stop this, and the analogy that I've used is and please understand, I don't have a doctorate in psychology, so this may not be a great analogy. But in martial arts, I've practiced jujitsu and other things. In martial arts, your body follows your head. So if I can control your head, I can move you any way I want. And I just realized, man, my thoughts are moving me all over the place, and I'm getting my tail kicked, and I got to do something about that. And so there were seeds, I'd like to think, more than like lightning bolts, that helped me to come to some realizations.
I love that, and I want to share with people right now that the average human being has 6,000 thoughts in a day. And so if you don't have a plan for those thoughts, it's going to be really tough. And, that's just real talk. So, and you just sort of articulated that. And then the other thing that I want to say is, whether your spiritual awakening comes through Christianity or Buddhism or maybe no organized religion at all, I do think that there's a lot of people that are sitting out there in that sea of unknown, and it would be really important for them, really impactful for them to latch on to something bigger than themselves, and to have that moment of clarity where they go, okay, these are the rules I want to start to live by, and these are the rules that I want to follow. And so I know you're a Christian and you're going to make those kind of analogies through, but I'm just really charging people who, because I went through a really long period of time where I had a bad taste in my mouth about Christianity because of the way that I grew up. And I'm not stupid. And I know that a lot of other people share that sentiment. And so I'm charging you right now, as you're listening this, to think bigger than just that word. Think about it as just being connected to something bigger than yourself and finding some purpose and some meaning that makes a lot of sense for you. And I think that's what you latched onto. You latched onto a belief system that just really seemed to align with who you were inside. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, well, and I don't want to get into the kind of the nuances of the different faith systems at all. I mean, because I have a master's of divinity now, and I'm a bit of a history dork, and so I don't want to go down that road. Cool. It's like, well, yahoo, here we go. But essentially, what Christianity speaks of, whether it's lived out appropriately or not. There's my please understand my caveat. I've spoken with thousands of people who have had similar responses to Christianity, maybe that you have had. So please know that is not, I get it, I guess.
Well, I'm in a very different place about it now. I mean, I spent some years there, but I'm completely in love with all the faiths now because I recognize their purpose for people.
Sure. Yeah. And so essentially for me, Christianity really is a relationship that looks different. So it's not rules that I follow, but it's somebody that I'm in a relationship with through Christ. And so what that means then is I have to orient myself to relationships differently. And that for me is really important, because if it's just rules, like I'm the worst rule guy ever. I'm as low on compliance as anybody I've ever met. One of the things I do in coaching is I do disc stuff, and I see all these people who have a high compliance, and I think like, oh, that'd be nice. But there's never been a rule that I haven't been willing to break. Yeah. And so for me, Christianity has way more to do with the relationship, and there's a dynamic there that's at play, and then it directly impacts my relationships with those around me, and obviously my relationship with myself. So primarily what the question that I ask myself when I have these different thoughts, and it's actually tied very closely to this. And again, please, I'm not meaning to go down a road we don't need to go down, but the Apostle Paul says you take every thought captive. And I never knew what that meant until I discovered mindfulness. And I realized, like, okay, here is actually a way for me to think about my thoughts and take them captive, meaning, do I want to assign value to them or not? And then ask the question, like, are they in line with what I believe that Christ would have to say about me is true or not? So there's a frame of reference here, not where I'm trying to enmesh, psychology and Christianity or any of those things, but say, like, here's a way to practice my faith that makes a great deal of sense. And it's right in line with something like mindfulness, where you observe your thoughts and go, I choose not to value this thought that I just had about myself or someone around me, for that matter.
All right, good. Well, Dr. Frank, anything from you? If not, I want to move on to some of these so he got himself out of it, found the new relationship. Do you want to ask him anything quick before I jump off into the next part of this?
No, go for it.
Okay, so now you found this relationship, and I'm guessing you're in your 20s when this is kind of unfolding. You said you were in college. Mm-hmm. So you go through college, and what do your 20s look like?
So early 20s look like a 1.6 GPA, and I could tell you every beer what it tasted like, blind taste test, all this stuff, and then a massive relearning. I mean, I literally just kind of going like, okay, time to revisit things. So what I used to do. I remember very clearly, I grew up in Western Montana, and I used to duck hunt. And there was this place called Crow Creek, where we used to go. And it's at the base of these mountains that are just spectacular. And I'd cut class because, there's rules that I don't follow. and I would cut class, and I would go and I'd sit at the base of the mountain and say, like, okay, what are the things that I'm not happy about in my life, and make a list. And what are the things that I'm happy about, and what do I want to pursue? And I realized that there's two things at play all the time. There's what I don't want and what I do want. And sometimes I'm more motivated by what I don't want than what I do want. And I never know what the motivation is. So in my 20s, it was largely like, wow, I don't want to be who I was. And so I'm going to go in a different direction. So learning how to avoid the negative thoughts and the behaviors as much as possible. And then to begin to pursue things that I did want. So I wound up graduating from college, which was a good thing. I got my GPA up. But then I also went and got my master's degree. And in my master's degree, it was me pursuing what I wanted. So I finished my 20s with, I think it was 28, 29, finished with a master's degree in divinity, and was looking at, okay, maybe, a career helping people figure out this whole Jesus thing and maybe having a new identity.
Wow, man. And then when do you meet your wife and have kids?
So we met in college, and actually she was having a very similar trajectory, man. She grew up in an environment where, live one way, behave another. So, yeah. Come home, change the radio station, act like everything's okay. But in reality, she was living two different lives. So she got to college and really went down some paths she wished she didn't go down. And then kind of had a similar thing to me. It's like, hey, she hated who she was and wanted to turn that around. And so we both got involved with a Christian organization on campus at the University of Montana there. And that's where we met. She said, there was this hunky guy up front. I think she was talking about my friend. And I just, I just won, so that's good. But yeah, so we met there, and we got married in 1995. We moved to Canada in 1996, and I graduated in 1999. So we spent our first few years married in Canada, learning all sorts of things about being married and about being Americans in Canada and all sorts of stuff. So it was really.
Well, I know you weren't there long enough because you didn't say a boat.
It's been trained out of me.
So then when do you segue? Because what I really want to spend the bulk of our time talking about today is something you referred to as the dignity gap. And I don't even know that I totally understand what this whole thing is about, but just those two words are so intriguing to me. So number one, good on you for a nice little piece of marketing. And number two, break that down for us. And then, Frank, I just want you and I to pepper them with questions.
Oh, I'm ready.
Let's go.
I'm not sure I'm ready, Frank. Hang on. So dignity is defined as having worth, or it comes from Latin dignitas, of being worthy or of having value. And the belief that every single human being on earth, regardless of their behavior and regardless of their station, has worth, is something that really resonated with me just in my own journey. But then as I'm observing people and I'm thinking, well, why aren't they treated as well as other people? And so particularly I've written the Dignity Gap book because I've seen this play out in the workplace. The vast majority of time people spend nowadays is at work. Work from home has changed that a little bit, where now we're at home. But if you think about it, we moved from an agrarian society where we're always at home, we're in the fields, we're with our family, we're with the people who are helping us stay alive. We move to urban areas, and our value decreases only based on, through the Industrial Revolution. Hey, if you can't pull this slot on this machine, somebody else will. And so this idea that humans have value regardless of who they are, what they do, all of those things, is, I think, critical to being human, period. And there's a massive gap when people treat each other like objects. And it's easy to point at things like the genocide in Rwanda, which I'm intimately familiar with, but then other instances of, on Nazi Germany or Mao or what Stalin did in the Ukraine. I mean, you can point anywhere you want in history, but where I go is like in the workplace, where we call people names, where we do the little tiny things. If somebody cuts you off and you objectify them, you call them something and you make them other than who they actually are and not address their behavior, it creates a massive gap, and that gap causes any number of problems.
It's so interesting that you say that, because truth be told, I got my first speeding ticket in like 20 years a couple of weeks ago. And I might have been going to say again.
Was it worth it?
No, absolutely not worth it. I was driving my family to Horseshoe Bend up in Page, Arizona, like on the middle of this freeway where going 70 would have been just fine. But I wanted to take it to 85, and he sure reminded me of that. At any rate, enough about me. I decided to do the driving school, because here in Arizona you can do driving school and then they don't give you the points or whatever. So I take the driving school, and one of the guys that was doing the class said that one of the number one reasons that we experience road rage and some of that stuff on the roads is because people literally have stopped seeing another car as it's carrying human beings in it. It's just an object. They're an obstacle that they have to overcome to get to where they want to go and where they want to be. And so hearing you say that about what your version and how you come to it, it's true. And you can see it play out every time you get behind the wheel. You can see somebody who does not see a car filled with other human beings. It is simply an object or something that they are trying to overcome, an obstacle that they must overcome. And it's true. That is the world we live in, where we have literally stopped seeing and hearing each other in so many different ways. And I'm guessing that's what lights your fire now.
Yeah, completely, and 100%. It doesn't mean that I don't do it. I mean, if I have to drive on the 60, I'm tempted all the time to violate somebody's dignity, and including my own, because I know that it's subhuman for me to behave that way. And so yeah, it is the thing that lights my fire, that that breaks my heart and that causes me to want to speak.
Traffic sounds like the real life version of like social media, right? Like the way you see people interact and talk to each other, like it is rare that two people actually talk to each other like that in person, face to face, but behind a computer, behind a screen, behind some kind of username, right? You're a little braver. Traffic is kind of the same way, right? You're in your car, I'm in my car. You're right. I don't see a person who has some kind of life. I see an idiot who doesn't know how to drive, right? And there's a couple of them, but right. And look how easy that tendency is to just, think of them as somebody who, or, something who isn't doing what I want them to do.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about this, Bob. What is the impact of, let's say, corporate America not having enough dignity for each other? I'm guessing that there is a dollar and cents thing that we can put on that.
Yeah, 100%. I would like to say about the traffic thing, for every idiot out there, I am somebody else's idiot. It's really important, because I'll look at everybody else. There's that saying, we judge others by their behavior, but we judge ourselves by our motivation. So of course, couldn't possibly be me. I couldn't possibly be the problem. And I think that we carry that into the workplace where we look at everyone else and we think like, well, they're the problem, and we're not actually taking a look at our own behavior and our own thoughts and our attitudes. So I talk about TAP, our thoughts, our actions, and our practices. So the problem is that, and I wrote about this in the book where I talk about the ladder of inference, where we can climb the ladder like just super fast. It is, you go from, the very bottom of the rung where you see a behavior to the top of the rung where I'm trying to inhibit somebody or I'm acting upon my thoughts. But I just try to reduce it to TAP, where I have a thought about a colleague or about an employee or about my boss, and it's a negative thought. And I think, well, they're stupid, or whatever. Well, then, and then it moves to an action really, really quickly. What does that look like? Well, I avoid them, or I gossip about them, or I do something else, and then the practice is that this is now prolonged and I'm making this a habit, and it's just part of how I go about my day. Well, when you do that in the workplace, you create toxicity in a heartbeat. It's like having a little tiny amount of infection in your mouth and the tooth, and then pretty soon you've got an abscess. Well, when we do that, that's in a kind of in a micro way, but when you do that systemically, I mean, it looks like the Roman Catholic Church and the problems that they've had. It looks like Penn State University or Michigan State University. And then so you've got a system-wide issue. And then, I mean, obviously if you take that all the way, that's when it looks like genocide. I mean, there was a reason that Jesus said, if you hate somebody, you kill them. It's like, that's a really strong statement. And it's like, well, they're linked pretty closely together. It's easy to create an object. And if you make an object, you can treat it any way you want.
Yeah, boy. But so when you're working with companies, how do you help people close the gap?
So that's a really great question. First, one of the first things we do is current state. It's like, tell me what's going on. Help me understand, and usually it's something like, well, we don't trust each other. We have difficulty with this. And so most people know that culture and bottom line are directly tied together, where if you have a negative workplace culture, if you have a toxicity in your workplace, then automatically people are less inclined to want to go to work. They're less inclined to want to work hard. They're less inclined to help the business at all. And the bottom line suffers. So there's usually some kind of bottom line where they say, hey, look, we need help with this. Most of the time, it's not all the time, but most of the time they think they need help in one place and they need help in another. I always try to start with communication, because I feel like if you can talk, then you can talk about anything. But if you can't talk, if you cannot speak each other's language, you're going to have a difficult time addressing things that have emotional content. So one of the most important ways to close the gap is to talk about communication and just say, okay, there are 4 basic ways people like to communicate, and which one are you? How do you deal with that? That's the Jungian model of personality and communication. So whether it's DISC or other behavior assessments, we try to use those so that we can just get an easy win, help people to get some awareness about how they're speaking. So I always talk about different languages, like I speak German, you speak Italian. I can yell at you all day in German. You still won't understand. I can send you emails in German and they won't make a bit of difference. I actually have to learn Italian in order for you to understand. And maybe you'd be willing, once I do that, to learn a little German so that I can speak my own language.
No, I like the analogy. I feel like we're really killing it with the analogies today. I feel like we're bringing like an A normal game. Yeah, above average for sure. Because I think that makes sense, right? It resonates with people, this idea that, like, you know, if you go to another country and you don't speak that language, you can talk as loud or as slow or, you know, make whatever kind of gestures you want. And like, you're not really going to get that point across unless you figure out how to speak the way that the other person, you know, can hear. You know, love languages is kind of a very similar thing. You know, we can look at somebody and be like, oh my God, all he does is buy her stuff, but he doesn't spend a lot of time with her or do these other things. And you know, does he really love her at all? Well, gifts is a very real love language for some people. And if it works for them, then they're communicating just fine. But yeah, there's all these different ways that we go about trying to communicate certain things, different ways that we do and or do not understand how and why other people do things. And if you can kind of close those gaps a little bit, I think a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably realize that like people and their ideas and their intentions aren't actually as far off as they think they were. They just felt far off because they were not communicating properly, or not. I don't want to say communicating properly. They were not communicating with each other effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a thing that we talk about with regards to intent and impact, and position and interest. So if we're talking about position and interest, somebody will say, my position is, you know, we could talk about dinner if we're going to talk about family systems. If you say like, well, you know, what are we going to have for dinner? And somebody says, well, we're going to have tacos. And everybody goes, I don't want tacos. And somebody else says, well, we're going to have hamburgers. And somebody says, oh, I don't want to have hamburgers. Well, you're stating what your position is, but you're not stating your interest. Your interest is to have food, to not be hungry, to you know, whatever, save money. There's any number of interests that are behind your positions. But what we wind up showing everybody is just our positions. We don't allow them to see our interests. And when you can pull those stakes up and you just say like, tell me what you're interested in. Well, I'm interested in us getting this done. I'm interested in us making sure that we secure this contract. I'm interested in us. And then you can have a conversation where you can say, me too. Right. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you're creating trust and empathy and all the things that we need in order to work together. But if you get stuck on your position, I mean, you're in trouble. And then, you know, there's intent and impact, meaning my intention is to communicate one way. The impact that I'm having on people may not be what I'm wanting. And you have to be at a place where you can have a discussion about that and ask key questions like, tell me how I'm coming across. So some of that is self-awareness, other things. So it's always kind of a mix, and you never really know exactly what you're going to get. But I do find that, I mean, the Human Genome Project has talked about the fact that we are 99.6% the same with anybody on the globe, all across the globe. Doesn't matter, male, female, black, white, red, doesn't matter. We're 99% the same. And I think about that all the time, where it's like, I have a lot of really big similarities with this person sitting across from me, and I'm allowing some small differences to be a hindrance. How can I overcome that? What does that look like? And I just think those are important questions to ask.
It's so critical. And I'm really compelled, since we have an expecting father on the right hand of us, to talk about how this model might be useful in parenting.
I have no clue. Ask the guy who's done this for 23 years.
That's who I was asking.
Oh,
okay.
I was asking Bob. I was like, you know, because this works in the corporate world, but it also would work at home.
Well, it has to work. So I always say this stuff has its biggest impact in the home. Yeah. With your closest relationships first. You know, I have a very difficult time with people who say, well, everybody at work loves me and my house hates me. Or, you know, in the church world, it's like, oh, what a great pastor. And then he's a terrible husband and father. That's not okay. You have to have integrity about who you are. So it has to start in the home with your closest relationships. And what that means is that I'm going to create an environment where my wife and my children can flourish. And that means that I'm taking into account the fact that they are worthy of that 100%. And then the question is, how do I help them to do that? What does it look like for me to create an environment for them to flourish? So right away, it's like their of worth doesn't matter 100%. Okay. Because of that, how can I treat them? How can I walk alongside them? Well, I think I have to know myself, one. So parenting tip 101, whatever, you cannot just match your children's their emotional state. So kids are off and up and down and back and forth and all those things. And as a parent, I can't join them in that. They need me to be just really steady. They need me to be calm. They need me to hang with them. I can hurt with them. I can laugh with them. I can cry with them. I can do all those things, but I'm not going to join them in the extremes, And I think that way, what does my wife need when she has terrible news at work? She doesn't need me to rage and to run around and slam doors and rah, rah. What does she need? She needs me to be present. But I need to be able to identify my own emotions, to identify my own thoughts, to harness those things in a way that's helpful so that I can be present to people around me. Because that's my primary job. I have to handle my own business so that I can be present to others. As a parent, that's parent and husband. That's job number one.
So then how does one accomplish that while still maintaining their own dignity and their own interests and giving themselves what they need? How do you serve other people while still serving yourself? Because I'm clear on this. I don't think you can be the best version of yourself without taking care of yourself.
Right. So the way that I think about this is like balance. You can stand on one leg. Okay, you can be balanced, but in reality, there's hundreds of muscles moving at the same time. And sometimes it's your arms and your head, and you're literally trying to balance. But if you're just standing on one leg, that leg is firing like crazy. Now it looks like you're just steady as all get out, but you're firing so that you can maintain balance, stabilizers, whatever you want to use. Another analogy for the show, apparently. Hopefully that's a good one. And so what that means for me is that I can validate my own dignity by identifying how I'm feeling and saying like, hey, I'm feeling angry about this. And you go, okay, well, what's behind my anger? I believe that anger is a secondary emotion. You may be able to, help me out with that, but say, well, really, I'm feeling violated, or I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm feeling something. So identifying my own emotion and naming it and maybe taking some of the power away is part of how I deal with my own dignity. So what I recognize is that if I have a lack of patience, for instance, and I say, man, I've been impatient lately. Well, what are some of the things that I know about myself that because maybe my cup's empty, it's like, what do I need to do? Again, self-awareness is critical. So go work out, go to jujitsu, go get choked, go choke somebody out. Like whatever you need, go for a walk. It is so therapeutic to choke somebody out. I gotta tell you.
And it's way better to do that at jujitsu than on the 60 because
right.
Or in the supermarket. I mean, couldn't believe how upset people were. I was like,
I just choked you out a little.
You clearly needed to take a nap. I saw you were feeling a little angry. But so having a self-awareness where it's like, these are some of the things that I need to be able to do to be fully present, critical. And then communicating that to those around you, I think is all part of validating your own dignity.
So as we wrap up here in the next 10, 15 minutes, let's talk a little bit about courage and leadership. These are two words that I love using more and more every day. And I like the word courage because to me, it takes a lot of courage to fight your way back to yourself. And, a lot of people feel real lost. They're not really sure who they are, what life is about, what it means. The people in their life might not make sense. They hate their job. There's like a million things that can play out. And I think it takes the most unbelievable courage to fight your way out of that situation. And it takes so much courage to raise your hand and say, man, I matter so much. I need to figure this out for myself. And so how would you talk to people about courage?
Well, again, it depends upon who I'm talking to and why they have me in front of them. But I almost always talk about fear. I mean, it's like, tell me what you're afraid of. And when I spoke earlier about, like what you want is in front of you and what you don't want is behind you, which one is motivating you more? The fear of remaining where you are, or, FOMO, or, are you more motivated by, I really want 6-pack abs and I'm going to get them, what is,
he's talking about you, Frank.
You could tell that I already have them, so I'm, I have no need. But so the challenge for me is to understand. Well, tell me what you're afraid of.
Yeah.
And then ask the question like, well, so for instance, I just take the 5 fears, and you would know this, Frank. What are the 5 basic fears that people, it's like death and loss of self.
What are they,
ability
Frank?
to
pop quiz?
Yeah, I can look them up because I can never.
I'm not
bring
good at
them
pop
off.
quizzes. I always liked knowing when the test was coming.
So it's really interesting because what happens is that people will orient around these without knowing that they're doing it. So extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death.
Okay.
So what are you facing? And really, usually most fears are kind of like a mixture. So it's like, man, I'm really afraid of losing autonomy, meaning like if I lose my job, I lose the ability to be autonomous or to have control of my own life. I won't have an income. I won't have insurance. I won't have these things. I'm concerned about that. There's ego death involved with that. Like, man, I'm going to lose face. I'm going to have to find a different job with a lower pay and a lower title. So right away, I just asked the question, tell me what you're afraid of. And then I say, okay, well, if you were to orient to that fear and say, okay, well, what can I do about that? Is there anything that can be done? That's where courage lies, in my opinion, is the ability to go like, okay, here's the thing that I'm afraid of, and I'm willing to stare that thing in the face and say, okay, I recognize that you're there. I understand. I'm moving forward. And so I try to help people see their own steps. I try not to give them steps, but just like, well, what's something that you could do, and ask them questions so that they come to their own conclusions about how to face that.
What do you have to say about fear and courage, Dr. Frank Bavacqua?
The year 2020 comes to mind.
Hit me.
And not COVID itself, but like you talk about that loss of autonomy. A lot of people lost a lot of autonomy that year for a lot of reasons that were not directly related to a disease process, right? Businesses were closed, jobs were lost. We were told in a lot of ways, where we could go or where we couldn't go, what we could do, what we couldn't do, how we had to do it. And so you had a very large subset of people who were getting angry for a reason that was not just medically related. And I think some people outside of that subset couldn't understand why that subset of people were getting so angry. But it played on, we all had some fear that year. But I think we were all a little bit afraid of losing something different. And we were not great at effectively communicating that to others. And I think it caused a lot of divide because everybody was afraid of something different. And what one person wanted in theory and then infringed on the autonomy that somebody else wanted and the protection that they wanted from their fear. It was not a great year. I never want to go back and do that year again. But it very strikingly kind of played out all of this stuff on a large, massive scale.
So when people sit down with you, Dr. Frank, and you inevitably find out that they're just scared, how do you help them step into a courageous place?
Just scared? I tell them to stop it, obviously. Right? I quote.
Stop it. No,
I quote.
That'll be $125.
I quote Nike, right? Just do it, right? You're scared, so do it. Correct me if either one of you can correct me if I'm wrong, but courage is not necessarily the absence of fear. Courage is recognizing that there's some fear there and doing the thing anyway. And Bob, I like what you said somewhere along the way of, you identify this fear and you kind of recognize what part in there do I have control over? What part, if we use the 2020 COVID example, there was a lot of stuff for a lot of us that it was outside of our control, right? And so we really had to look closely, which pieces of this can I control and can I step into that to feel better? But I think it comes down to those two things. One, identifying the pieces of the bigger picture that you do have control over, and two, figuring out how to act even in the face of feeling this other feeling scared, feeling fearful. You don't act once the fear goes away. Sometimes the fear starts to subside once you start to act, right? Anybody who's ever gone on stage, public speaking, anything, right? Anytime I've ever spoken in front of people, there's always that little bit of nervousness right before you get started. And you don't wait for that to go away before you step on the stage or get started. Once you step on the stage and get started, that's when that usually melts away after a minute or two, and then you're just rolling. Sometimes I think people wait for the wrong order.
Man, you are so fantastic, Doc.
I told you I have to hang on to some good stuff, so you keep having me back.
The reason that I asked that question, and the reason I'm so happy you said what you said, is because I think that's what so many of us do, myself included there for a while. It was like I waited for the fear to subside before I would get brave. It was like, well, when everything's like normal, then I'll do something. And that's not courage. Courage is, this doesn't feel very good. And you still push through that feeling because you know about the enormous amount of freedom that's waiting for you on the other side. Yeah. If you can just get through that thing. So I love the answer, Doc. Thank you.
Nailed it.
Yeah, and I would also say, when you think about people who, and this is not clinical, so please forgive me, doctor. Sometimes it just takes courage just to walk out the door, to go to the store, to put on your shoes, to face another day, and I think the ability to say like, the question for me is always like, does motivation come after I do it or before I do it? And I'm not always motivated to do something, but I do it knowing that motivation can be produced out of that, or that courage will be produced out of my operating in fear. And I think sometimes the most courageous thing somebody can do is pick up a phone, call or text a friend, just little tiny moments that are just absolutely courageous and terrifying for those people. So I think courage can be displayed in these really beautiful, difficult, challenging, small moments that are going to be cataclysmic and helpful in a way. And so I, because a lot of guys like and this is marriage. So here's marriage 101. I did, the guys will always say, yeah, I'll take a bullet for my wife, blah, blah, blah. So that's really great. Will you pick up your socks for your wife? I don't really care about the bullet. Nobody's going to shoot you. Nobody's going to shoot your wife, but will you pick up your socks, and will you put the toilet seat down, and will you do the things that are little tiny things that require some small death on your part in order to show her you love her? And I think that's just as courageous.
Can I just take the bullet?
You picked the wrong thing to get involved with. If that's your guys, like you picked the wrong deal.
Yeah, no, but that is such a great thing. It's such a great thing for men to hear, because there is that attitude of like, I would die for it. And it's like, oh, you would? How about would you empty the dishwasher?
Right.
Would you freaking would you go pick up the kids from daycare so that she can have a 30-minute nap? I mean, you'll die for. Will you not come help me out here?
And I think that's a different kind of death. I really do. It's you're going to learn how to die to yourself when you're married, and if you don't, then your marriage is going to die. That's plain and simple. And too many people get into marriage thinking, this is 50-50, and it's like, no, it isn't. It's 100-100. I mean, some days I'm given 80 and she's given 20, and other days it's the other way around. But it's a constant willingness to lay my own desires down and to say, nope, I love you, and I'm going to show you that I love you this way. Critical piece, and I think it's courageous. So I'm happy to brag that this month, just a few days, 10 days, it'll be 28 years for us in marriage, and it looks like that. So it may feel like you're taking a bullet when you're doing the dishes. If that helps you to think of it that way, then you can be like, what's up?
Yeah.
I'm a Purple Heart.
But just don't say that to her when you're done. Don't be like, babe, where's my award?
Tell your buddies when you're, somewhere else or you're doing something. The Purple Heart that she'll talk about has to do with that baby coming in a few months. It'll be like, you want to compare? This is a silver star. You just got a little nick over here.
Outstanding. Bob, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And I want to give everybody an opportunity for any final thoughts. Dr. Frank Pavak, key to you first. Anything here as we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to tie it all together, which I know really big undertaking, but I mean, I'll start where we just kind of ended off. Like, that idea of doing all those little things that is going to make that other person happy. And I think you would both agree that it's even more important on the days that we don't want to, or the days that, we're mad at each other for some reason, but we still, there's been days where she's been less than perfectly pleased with my wonderful self, but she still made my lunch that day or something, right? She didn't withhold the thing that, we've agreed to do for each other because of some temporary thing that she was feeling about whatever was going on that day, right? Tying it all the way back to the beginning, that this idea of self-loathing and courage, stepping into stuff before you feel like it. People need to learn how to step into doing those nice things for themselves before they feel like they deserve it, or even when they feel like they don't deserve it, right? That's how you get onto the other side. That's how you keep the negative feeling temporary rather than permanent, right? It's a blip on the radar rather than the entire operating system, right? You still act as if I am worthy, as if tomorrow is going to be different. You act as if, and eventually, you get there.
Perfect. Bob, any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think the important, well, thank you. First of all, I'm grateful to have this conversation with you and kind of the meandering way that we get around what it means to have value and to think about dignity. And I would just say that if you're the kind of person who thinks of yourself as worth less, I want you to know that it's not true. Even in our culture, we have seeds of dignity everywhere. And again, forgive me for this. I know we're trying to wrap up. Our emergency services are an example of that. If there's a car accident, people will put themselves in harm's way to get you out of the car because you have inherent worth, period. They don't know your voting record. They don't know what kind of father you are. They don't know who they don't know anything about you, but they'll run in and they will get you out of that car. Why? Because as a culture, we've decided that that's important. And so even on that level, you have value, you have worth. It matters a great deal that you're here. So if you are in a place of disgust, I want to encourage you with that. Like, no, that's simply not true. It may be how you feel, it may be how you think, but that's not it. And that dignity is a way forward, not just for you, but those around you in the workplace, on the 60 in our marriages. All of our relationships can drip with dignity.
Brilliant. There's a couple of books out there by this guy. One of them is that one right there called The Dignity Gap by Bob Fabey. Are you leading beyond diversity and inclusion? Thank you, sir, so much for your time today, for your insights today. We'll link to all of your projects in our show notes. Dr. Frank Pavak, thank you for your insights and your amazing analogies today. And those 2 gold stars that I will send you in the mail for your nuggets today.
Oh, I'm putting them up on the wall. They're going on the fridge. Absolutely.
I would think so. I would think so. Bob, have a great day. Dr. Frank,
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.